Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back from the workshops and the coffee break. My name is Toby. I work for SAPEA. And thank you for seeing through the day. And I was going to say I hope you all had productive workshops, but I know you did because I wandered in and out a few of them. And the discussions were as vibrant and interesting as I would have expected. So now we come to the final session of the day. First, I'm going to request if the leaders of the workshops, or at least one leader from each workshop who would like to speak for a moment or two about the outcomes of their workshops, could come just to the front and congregate or sit in these seats here. That would be really helpful. So, while that's happening, in addition to the interesting free-ranging discussions that have taken place, we also kindly asked each workshop to produce one or two messages that we think are important to highlight, and in particular that could be sent to the European Union and or to the government of Finland as they consider the future of science advice for them. And those messages, as they were conveyed to us by the workshop leaders, have been will magically appear on the screen in front of us right now. So here's the plan for the session. First, we'll just quickly whiz through those messages so that you're all familiar with them. Then I will reintroduce you to our panel of auditors from civil society, the people you met this morning when that spotlight shone on them in the first session. And we will invite them also to comment briefly on the suggestions you've made and to make a couple of suggestions of their own. Then, with all those suggestions in mind, I will ask you through the magic of technology, if you have a mobile device or a laptop with you, to go to a website called Screenio, for which you will find the link on the screen, and I'll tell you when we get there, to vote for what you think is the most important, the one most important message of all the messages on the screens that you would like to send. And then, again, by the magic of technology, on this screen will appear, I trust, your rankings. And then we have plenty of time for discussion of what's been chosen, what we've missed, and so on and so on. There's also a box on the Screenio site for you to type any free comments you'd like. For instance, we forgot to talk about X or why was the coffee so delicious here and it's not at home, or whatever. So, workshop leaders. Workshop 1, Science Advice in a Complex World. I see that maybe Pearl is right here. Please tell me these messages look familiar to you.
Yes.
Excellent. Would you like to, for 1 to 2 minutes, really quickly run us through what was the output of your workshop? Thank you.
Actually, I want to comment on the workshop format. It was very nice. So I want to compliment or pay my compliments to the organizers for dividing us up and putting us in spaces where we could see each other very closely and where we could actually engage in discussion. Very nice. What these messages, yes, maybe for the EU, what we also said is policy advice has to be based on excellent science or high-quality science. And for Finland, yes, it's crucial if issues are complex, uncertain, and contested, but that goes for the EU as well. Definitely better than intuition, but what we also said there is that, and here we have to go back to the science, is that science shows that intuition is often wrong. So we also talked about making use of insights from science on biases, on intuition, on how to reduce biases, how to deal with complexity. So it's not sufficient just to talk about them and say we have to deal with them, but also to make use of the latest developments in science, the tools developed by science to deal with such concerns. That's what we talked about.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Workshop number 2. Wim. Where's Wim? Do these look familiar to you? I beg your pardon? Thank you.
I was delegated for my youth and maybe my inability to take responsibilities. So it's pretty close, but let me read what we came up with, a consensus statement. So do not mix science for policy, that is advice, with policy for science, that is lobbying. So if your organization does both, these have to be separated. For impact, you must have, or at least identify, a recipient for the advice, and you need to engage them throughout the process. And finally, scientists should not merely be a passive source, but a proactive resource for advice. And we discussed all of these topics and several others, and felt that these three were the key messages we wanted to bring.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Science advice as a team sport. Who will speak? Aha! There you are, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, we, out of 20 or so ideas that were discussed, these two now are on the screen. I think the first one points out that you need a long-term constant participation for various kind of people and institutions for science advice and their activities and practices. And to motivate people and keep people coming together, there are various ways, and these ways need to be understood. Civil servants have responsibles. Researchers rather are motivated with the issues and topics, and at the same time they will need, especially they will need incentives to keep up with science advice activities, but civil servants and politics too. And that means that the engagement activities and efforts, they demand quite a lot of resources and efforts, and understanding of this diversity of people that come together to work with these issues. Then, as I said, these are not people are put together for once and then things are decided, but the processes are long, and they need planning. They need probably changing networks, changing groups that communicate with each other, and there the key issue for us are that there needs to be time to arrange this, to keep these processes up, and these processes need to be transparent, so everybody involved and even further on in the community or society can see what's taking place, what kind of issues are discussed and decided upon. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ooh. Scientific knowledge and reason. David, our nominated representative. May I? Thank you.
Thanks very much. So we had a very wide-ranging discussion on the report, Understanding Our Political Nature, and it's quite hard to summarize, so I cheated a bit and just put in the final conclusion of that report, which I hope carries a consensus of the people in the room, that these questions about evidence-informed policy is not a dry, technocratic issue. As someone said in the earlier session, this is at the heart of the current political crisis we're working in. There are forces at work in our countries and our societies who are seeking to undermine the way in which policy is informed by evidence. So all this work is in fact deeply political and goes to the heart of what it means to live in a liberal democracy.
Thank you. Katri, number 5. Thank you.
So, we approached the theme so that we wanted to provide some concrete examples on other ways than topical science advice or traditional science synthesis to build bases for science advice, dialogue and trust. And we also wanted to ponder the ways we can train future science leaders. We had first 2 inspiring examples from Sweden, and always, of course, Sweden, and from Scotland about those kind of schemes for science advice that help to create connections, knowledge about scientific processes, not maybe any topics, and also trust. So at the end of our workshop, Severi Hämeri also provided us a demonstration of a dialogical discussion method called timeout. So basing on this, we concluded these not so short recommendations or messages. So ensuring the plurality of voices of science advice and the training of future science advice leaders. Young researchers of Finland and Europe should have recognized, supported and formal role in the science advice mechanisms of Finland and Europe. And also that future science advice mechanisms should take into account the plurality, hard word, of the tools that can be used to legitimize the position of science advice in the whole society.
Wonderful. Thank you. Number 6. Sigrid. Thank you. As you like.
Hello, so this is a very condensed version of
It is
what was
somewhat, yeah.
in our discussions. We started off with a more general discussion, actually, about the general principles of science advice. So it was emphasized that science advice needs to be transparent, independent, and based on unbiased expertise, experts' evidence, which will help with trust and credibility. Independence was underlined as being important, and in this regard it was said that the government should actually leave some choice to the scientific advisors, for instance, as regards the choice of topics they work on. It was said that a lot of knowledge is already available regarding sustainability, which was actually the subject of our workshop, but that we need more evidence, more science from the social sciences, from the political sciences, behavioral sciences, and adaptation to climate change was given as an example where very often until today the focus was too much on the natural science and on the impact of climate change. We need to be aware of the values, emotions, beliefs, and so on, which play a role in the decision making. They should be better acknowledged, and this based on science to better understand what they are. And it was said that philosophers of science can actually help with this. They can also help with understanding the divide in society and in the public in general, and to help avoiding the divide which is currently present on, in particular, or as an example, relating to topics regarding sustainability. It might be obvious for many of us, but it was really emphasized again and again. It's necessary to better integrate evidence from social sciences and technological sciences, and that this will help to work with the how question. So very often science advice focuses on the what, but less so on the how. So how can we actually achieve what needs to be achieved? This will, for instance, help, or it could help with the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Then another important aspect was that we need to explain to the policymakers what uncertainty is, what types of uncertainties are there, what does they actually mean, and that this could help actually with addressing the long-term issues, which very often are sacrificed to policy cycles. And last but not least, it was said that in order to achieve a more transdisciplinary approach in scientific advice, you have to start already with the education and the training. And though this was not the last but not least, the last but not least is that we should also introduce a kind of future-proofing in the policy recommendations. So very often what might be the best option, policy option now, is no longer the best one. It's the future, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you. Personally, very pleased to see philosophy got a mention before the end of the day. That's always good. And our final workshop, Jaakko.
Great. So we had a wonderful all-female +1 panel, sparring me, Joona from Academy of Finland. We had sparring me on the latest work of Sofi Science Advice Initiative, and our discussion went from basically on how to create change and what are also the enablers and barriers of change, both in Finland and more broadly, and things that we discussed about the challenge and the reality of the interconnectedness between the macro level, the systems level, and then the micro level. So basically, at the same time, you need to create change at the very micro level and do small practical changes, but then obviously those are always interconnected to the system, and then the system also needs to change, and how do we basically navigate through this terrain of change, because obviously you can't split two parts and just be everywhere and create systemic change, but then you can be conscious of these dimensions. And then I think that the discussion went to the enablers in the Finnish system quite a bit, and questions about what are those drivers of helping this type of systemic change, and we identify things like low hierarchies and high societal trust, and high trust in science. On the other side of the street today, they released the science parameter for this year. So I'm sure a few people have been in Twitter looking at the parameter for Finland looks currently pretty good, as far as I know. So these were the kind of topics that we discussed, and I think I got a lot on board for the development work in the future. So thank you very much for that.
Great, thank you. Now, during today's conference, I have had the privilege to be an observer in a very interesting WhatsApp group that these four people in front of us have been running during the plenaries this morning and during the workshops this afternoon, typing in all their thoughts and responses, and, ooh, that sounds good, and, ooh, I don't agree with that, for everything they've heard being going on the stage. And I hope in a few minutes they will be able to share with you some of those insights in as feisty terms as they were expressed in the WhatsApp group, or something like that. Before they do, however, I'm just going to ask them very briefly to run through a couple of points that they pulled out, or that I pulled out from what they told me, to add to this list of already long and eminent recommendations. I don't know how you want to do this. Perhaps you could just spend a couple of minutes explaining what it was you were thinking about when you said these things, and a few of the others.
Yeah. Hi, nice to be here. We were thinking quite a lot about that citizens shouldn't be involved only in the end of the process, but also at the start of the drafting of the law or the policy. So not just see citizens reserving some science advice or something that they should comment on, but take them at the start. And the second one concerns science communications, because we see that facts themselves don't change anything. So there is a gap from scientific results, like in the policy recommendations. So we have to kind of interpret the scientific results into something, and better science communications help quite a lot in this. So we can communicate the results better, so people understand them better, and maybe it builds some trust between citizens and scientists, and that might be a really good thing for everyone.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. Since I'm basically about to ask you the impossible, maybe you can have 5 minutes to do it in. We would be eternally grateful if you would power up your mobile devices and your laptops and all other connected devices. Pop along to this URL right here, and you will see there what you've just seen on the slides, a long list of detailed and interesting messages about science advice. And as I say, asking the impossible, if you could select the one that if you could only say that one, you would choose to send to policymakers, both in Finland and in the EU. Don't despair, because this system will rank your choices, so it's not like it'll only tell us the number one hit. Also, there is space on the same webpage where you can type any comments you like. So if you would like to make a contribution or a comment to the debate, but you don't feel like you want to raise your hand in the conversation we're about to have, or you'd like to do it this way as well. Yeah, okay, this is fair, that's fair. So there's no hurry, there's no hurry. Yeah. I should do it as well. Woo. Did we miss one? Young researchers, that was from workshop 5, I don't see this. I apologize if we missed one. Type it in the additional comments box and then it will be there anyway. It's in grey, maybe. Yeah, I can. As you see the free text comments appearing that people are typing, you'll notice that you can also tap on those, or presumably click on them, in order to give those a boost. So you can also vote for other people's free comments that they're typing right now. Can we scroll so that we can see the lower? Where do I need to go? Aha. Is it still legible? No. Yes, the winner is our abstract principle. We'll have 90 seconds more. Auditors, I'm next going to ask you to open the discussion of these principles and how they've been voted, and anything else you think is missing. Okay. Yay, everyone who's voting for philosophers, thank you. And the top one is there.
well, maybe I can continue a bit. So,
Please.
from our viewpoint, it was really good that the citizen participation was noted in main presentations, and also that the science advice thing isn't only like top-down thing, where like some science people give facts to the users of the facts. So that was nice, but like the basic discussion revolved kind of between like scientists and policymakers, and that is of course a really good thing, but we didn't see that it's not enough yet, so we also need citizens from the beginning in the process. So there are a couple of reasons, like in many cases, like citizens' opinions and their knowledge is not evidence, and that's okay too, but they have quite a lot of knowledge about their own lives and things that actually about the policies and what is important to them. So taking into account that kind of knowledge might be good for policy processes and also can make policies better. So evidence and citizen knowledge can be together even better than any of them like alone. So that is nice thing and should be done more.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy for the result because I voted the one that got 14 votes, and then the second would have been the values and emotions for me as well. But I think that we are a bit missing the how to do this all in practice, and I think that we could go to that for a bit later and also tell about some examples. But just in order to have politicians, scientists, and civil society to defend science, what we need there is probably the capacity building of them all to somehow, I'm not sure how to do it, but train or politicians, or then just to get politicians and researchers into dialogue and really to help politicians or policymakers to understand. I say especially politicians to understand what is research, what are the methods, how it is, how knowledge is really created. And I think that in order to have civil society along with this defend, it would be wise, as already Lari has mentioned, to engage civil society more in the knowledge creation processes. And the other question, I would actually be very happy to hear some examples from you or from the audience, because we all know that emotions and values are highly relevant in decision making, and it would be very important to pay more attention there and make them more transparent. But do you have some examples how to make them transparent, like in real life policy making or also in research when building up research questions or so frameworks? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think maybe I will jump into a few examples. But first I wanted to say that I'm also really happy about the outcomes here, but then my question would be, why don't we do it that much? And I'm actually, I was not surprised when it was mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that people in Finland have a high level of trust in science. Of course they do. We do trust science. Scientists are so knowledgeable that it's quite obvious that people do trust science, and this comes up a lot, not only in Finland. Overall, people have trust in scientists and in science. What they kind of have hard time having trust in is in everything that happens within the science that you do and the world we live in, and all the process that happens in between. So I wanted to bring two examples that for me are quite inspiring about concretely how this can maybe made better, and and also fulfill some of the points that are there. I would like to go back to the point of air quality, for example. And I normally wear several hats. I work in multi-stakeholder engagement in general, but today I will focus mostly on citizen science. So when it comes to air quality, do you know the air quality measurements that are done in cities? Do you know, does any one of you know at which height normally the measurements are made? So normally they are made at 2 meters or higher. So if you look at sensors that measure air quality in cities, they're at least 2 meters high or higher. And that's because there are fixed things there and they need to be protected. They need to be somewhere where people cannot destroy them or they don't have any interference. Now, maybe in Finland people are a bit higher than in Italy, that's where I'm from, but there are not that many people that are 2 meters high. So that's definitely not the air that we breathe, and definitely not the air that children breathe. So if you look at air quality, it's really one of the topics where there has been a lot of work when it comes to citizen science, so much that it has been picked up by the JRC and by the European environmental agencies, who are really trying to make it part of the official monitoring system that is used to measure air quality. And there's a really interesting example that I suggest that you have a look at. It's a project that is called Curiose Nose. It's Curious Noses, and it happened in the city of Antwerp, where a couple of scientists, with the support of the Environmental Protection Agency, decided to start collecting data about air quality in a different way. So they gave out sensors to citizens to collect and monitor the quality of the air in the city. And by chance, they published the outcomes of this 4 days before the regional elections. So you can imagine the impact that this had on the elections. But also, what was really interesting to study here was also to observe from a social sciences point of view the impact that this had on the life of the people who participated in the study. So first of all, there was a richness of data collected that didn't exist before, but then nothing happened. There was no policy change. There was no decrease of cars, better public transport. So what happened is that a lot of people moved. They moved away from where they were living because they were made even more knowledgeable about the really bad quality of air. It seems that in Antwerp, the quality of the air is even worse than in Brussels, which I find quite astonishing. They just moved away because, of course, now that I have the data, I really trust science, but I don't trust that anything will happen to make things better. And a second example, I will be really brief, that I would like to bring is also linked with health, but from a totally different point of view. I don't know if you ever heard about 3D printing in the biomedical field. So nowadays, if you need to have a replacement, a hip replacement, whatever, normally what is placed in your body is something that is absolutely perfect and very secure in terms of standards, but might not be the best for you actually, because all our bodies are different. So there is a lot of activities going on. You can call it do-it-yourself science or whatever, of people who have, even scientists obviously, who have started 3D printing replacements that are absolutely perfect for your body. So what would you prefer? Something that is not fit for you, or maybe could be okay, but not exactly perfect for you, or something that is really 3D printed and actually perfect for you, but will not have a label, a standard that is recognized all over Europe. And there is a fantastic project that is going on right now about creating new standards for 3D printed replacements along with patients, along with doctors. So where do we want to push the boundaries? It involves insurances, it involves a lot of ethical issues, but it's being faced and it's being discussed. There is a fantastic website that is called Patients Innovations, patients have come up with such fantastic ideas for illnesses that they are suffering, ranging from really basic things up to very highly technological ones, that this website, one of the first things they did was to find legal support for these people, because pharmaceutical companies wanted to buy their ideas for really cheap and make a lot of money out of them. So what I wanted to say is basically that all this is happening. And it will happen whether scientific advisors or policymakers want it or not. There is a lot of changes that are happening between the way science is being done, the way data are being collected, etc. So you can choose, and okay, the disclaimer here is that we were asked to be provocative, so my view on this is that you have three choices. You can either ignore it, fight it, or deal with it. If you deal with it, it can actually, it's going to be really hard, very difficult, and it's totally fine to be scared. It's not easy. It needs to bring to some kind of changes in the way scientific advice is produced and in the way it impacts on policymaking. But it has a huge potential. It can bring you to better, it can actually bring you to better advice. And at the same time bring a societal engagement with it. Or you can actually ignore it. I was a bit surprised to hear this morning that these stakeholder workshops that are done once policy advice is produced, that the head of the scientific advice to the European Commission mentioned, then what comes out from the stakeholders is, yeah, that's it, we don't change it. So you can ignore it or fight it, but then please stop complaining about the lack of trust in science and take up a bit of your own responsibility about the lack of openness and transparency and engagement. That's it.
Thank you very much. We will in a moment open up the discussion, because I think you've certainly provoked a few ideas in my mind. But before we do, I have one question of my own. It says here, includes citizens in the early stages. Science capital can help to identify participants. What's that mean? Javier, I'm looking at you because you wrote it.
Okay, yeah, I mentioned it. Social capital is a concept that tries to measure the level of interest and engagement of the people in science, of the civil population in science. I work at the science museums in La Coruña, in my city, and we are trying to use that tool to find out what people are interested in, not what we think people are interested in, but what they are actually interested in. So we use it as a tool to design our exhibitions, to answer the questions they have, not the questions we think they have. So I think science capital could be used to find out who could be involved, which kind of people could be involved early in the stages of science advice, to learn from them what they're really worried about. There's a project, an EU-funded project called Concise, which is trying to find out where do people get their science facts and information from, and I think you'd be surprised, because for many of you, science and evidence-based facts are pretty much evident, but maybe for the people you're trying to work with, no. And sometimes today here, I was thinking of the idea of science for the people, but without the people. People should be brought into the equation. And not only by asking them what they are worried about, but also via telling them why some decisions are made, which led to some policies to be put into effect. And I think there's a place there for science communicators. Mr. Seppo Mata said it sometime this morning. We have to communicate better our policies and the reasons behind them. Just people know why they are put into effect, not because some scientist or some politician high up in the decision-making scheme of the European Union decided it. We have to tell them why, and why it matters to them. And if not for that reason, Mr. Risto Nieminen told the story about the Soviet scientists who worked in a bubble where nobody knew what they did. When the USSR failed, nobody cared about them, but because nobody knew what they were doing for the society. If you work in a bubble, you'll have this problem sooner or later. We were trying to be provocative, weren't we?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thoughts, contributions? While you're deciding when to put your hand up, I will read out some of the more highly voted comments on the screenio. Role of target groups not willing to take advice. How to organize science advice quickly as expert task forces. There's one oh yes. The relatively normative assumption behind much of the talk today has been we need to science advice better and more science advice is better. I think it's important to ask why exactly, for whom, and in which context is science advice, in all of its plural forms, needed. That was interesting to me because I think it seems obvious for me in the bubble that I work in that of course science advice is good and more science advice is better, but that doesn't mean we have a clear idea about how to explain the reasons behind that. Sure. Nope.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe that also comes to, it was already mentioned, I think, here somewhere, that is also in one of the recommendations maybe that it's important to plan the science advice well, and I may be quoting now Eva Hellström from Sitra, that it's very important to stop to think what is what kind of knowledge we need for different sort of situations. We can produce information and even research in such many ways, but in order to have the knowledge that we really need in complex questions, we need very different sort of knowledge than in simple ones. So we should really plan carefully and stop before starting to do anything, I guess.
If I can continue a bit, it's really important to talk about the actual processes in ministries and those kind of institutions who actually do the policies. So we cannot be just talking about like abstract level things about how science should be done, or like, because the civil servants at the end are drafting the policies. It's there where we should be like intervene with some kind of new things. So it's not easy because, for example, ministries have been doing the things they are doing for a long time, so there are really strict processes, and that's okay. But like there is where the impact could happen. So we need more talk about like how public sector works and how we can put the evidence there better. So more like concrete stuff about the concrete processes in concrete institutions.
Sure. Paul.
I want to respond to a comment that you made about what I said this morning, where I said that yes, we invite, once we have our recommendations, we invite stakeholders. And we listen, but we do not change our recommendations, and you objected to that. Let me bring a different viewpoint. Don't forget that we are looked upon, and I know that some people even think that what we write is drafted by others or drafted by industry or NGOs. The idea that what we as, in this case, chief science advisors say is not ours, but has been influenced by lobbyists would really undermine our effectiveness. I am fully in favor of finding ways to engage citizens in the production of science, in the understanding of science, in the dissemination of science, in the creation of science, in the development of science questions. But sometimes it's absolutely crucial, and when we're talking about trustworthiness, and we're talking about integrity, and we're talking about authority, that we can speak in our own voice and say, we have not been influenced by industry, political parties. We will say we might be influenced by our values, but we'll be explicit about it. So I want to have said that. We do not dismiss the role of our interaction with stakeholders in any way.
Yeah. Can I just answer quickly? I agree and I understand the importance of this, but I also think that engaging society is also a great way to defend yourself from this type of critics. And I would like to bring as an example a project I coordinated. It was back in 2013, where we ran a huge consultation all over Europe about waste and waste management. The Commission wanted to have looked into creative ideas that citizens could come up with when it comes to waste and waste management. And there were lots of incredible outcomes from it, but lots of what came out of it was also about policy. And at the beginning, there was pure fear. So the scientists and policymakers that were involved in the process, they were just literally shouting, we don't care what the citizens will say, we have our priority. Our priority at the moment is finance any type of research that will make plastic recyclable. We have a huge problem with plastic. A lot of plastic cannot be recycled. So that's our priority of research. And we will not, and there is lots of scientific reasons behind this being a priority, and we will not change it, and citizens don't know about this. We did this consultation in all member states involving a lot of citizens, and we did not say a single word before consulting them. There was absolutely no training, no previous information given. People came to these activities, these focus groups, and in every single one, the first top priority that came up from citizens, we even had illiterate people that participated, was about the fact that lots of plastic cannot be recycled. So then everyone was really happy. And that made the scientific priority and the scientific advice even stronger. You have a whole society behind you saying that's extremely important. So I'm not saying you should change or you should only base your scientific advice on this, but it can make it even more powerful and supported. Sorry, there is a hand over there.
Maybe we'll take another question.
I see someone.
Rudy, hello.
Yes, hello. I'm Rudolf Hilscher. I'm the coordinator of SAPEA. I wanted to say something else, but I would like to jump in for a short while. I think there is a misunderstanding still about processes and about the question what science is. So those things you're mentioning to engage citizens in science advice mechanisms, I would like to translate it a bit more sharp. We should engage citizens in science. This is fine. Because if this happens, we don't have to change the processes of a scientific advice mechanism. Because the scientists, the experts who are involved in producing, in this case, our evidence reviews report from SAPEA, and afterwards the group writes up their opinion, they include these kind of science because they are working transdisciplinary. So we have sociologists and all kinds of other disciplines involved, and they should have these kinds of citizen science in their knowledge, within their institutes, in their universities, and so on. So this is just to make the difference. But I have another point at the end, which we stressed a bit in our working group, but which I would like to bring back to our table. We are speaking about the future of science advice, but we are lacking a bit of speaking about the recipients of science advice. So like always, we are sitting here as the science advisors or those who are working in this community, but we don't talk to them who perhaps want or want not our science advice. And this interface is perhaps most crucial for the question how we place ourselves, what we are doing and what impact we are creating. In our group, there was one thing that we said, if we don't have somebody who wants to be advised, then science advice is useless. Really, to bring it to the point, then it's useless. And there are lots of activities also in the academy world where academicians sit together and say, okay, come on, this is an important topic, let's produce a report. And afterwards you try to sell it to somebody and nobody wants to have it, or is perhaps only polite. And then it's useless. It's a waste of time. I was the head of staff of a minister, of a deputy prime minister. So I had a lot of really good reports on my table, but I couldn't use it because it was not at the right time or whatever. And then you just throw it away and you're sad about it. So although it is not completely 100% optimal in the science advice mechanism of the Commission, at least the Commission has found some means that the commissioners were asked, what are your questions science can answer, which then you can use for better policy? And if there is a politician or a public servant or whoever in politics or a party who requests something and waits for your answer, then you can at least be a bit more sure that you create an impact later, rather than just preparing some scientific advice and nobody's interested.
I'm not sure personally if there is a tension there between this idea of making sure that science advice meets the demand from policymakers so that it's useful and effective, versus involving citizens in the giving of advice and indeed in the forming of science. Alta, did you want to respond?
I could just continue from there, because I think that is very, very important question, like who are we communicating, or who, like, to who the science advice is for. And there's just one group that was mentioned in the morning session, media, which is not presented here, is invited, but they don't, like, we understand journalists as well as politicians are too busy to come along to join these seminars. But still, we actually, in our organization, we asked Finnish policymakers and politicians which are the most important channels for them through which they receive scientific information. And media was the top number one. It was very, very clear that daily media, like biggest newspapers and TV, it's the most important channel also for communicating research. So I don't know, maybe it's not possible to have media or journalists as such as part of the science advice mechanism, but it should somehow be noted as a very, very important stakeholder group. And as well as we want to empower citizens and take them along in creating knowledge as well. I think that we should really give support to journalists who are willing to really communicate research to both to politicians, policymakers, and to wider audience. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions. Two, if we take them together. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Erik Bonstorff. I'm a scientist, a professor at a small university, and sitting in an ivory tower when I'm not doing this kind of thing, which I do a lot. And I think one of the things when you engage citizens in science is that we need to be clear about what science is. Information and knowledge, which we can use various mechanisms to convey. And you can go out on the street and ask people if they think something is important, and they say plastic. But plastic is not the same as science. I mean, if you can't go out on the street and say, listen, I have a brain tumor, what should I do? Oh, go play football. No, I would not take that advice. So I think you're absolutely right in involving citizens. It's really, really vital for the understanding of the fact that we need science. But we should not trust them to know what science is all about. And there is a fundamental difference there, because creating new knowledge, creating new scientific findings, that's what Europe, for instance, and society will need in the future. We will need to adapt, we will need to transform somehow into a new reality, which is, just look at the climate change for one example. And so then we don't have to trust, it's up to individuals to believe me or not to believe me. But it's not up to anybody on the street to define what science is. It takes decades for a person to be trained as a scientist. So popular vote and science are both important, but they are not the same thing.
Thank you.
Sure, Lari?
Yeah, we were actually thinking about this issue a bit, and one thing was that the policy processes should be itself evidence-based, and there should be like good methodology to engage citizens. So we are not just asking random people from Mannerheimin Katu that what you are thinking about this issue, and that's the main issue, that we should have like good processes, like how to do this, how to get people into these processes, and like get something innovative for that, and that needs quite a lot of work to be done at this point. But it's important to remember that, yeah, they're not the same thing, like people's opinion and science, but think about like what is like their relationship in the policy processes, and that work isn't done yet.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think, yeah, just quickly, I think we are not saying that it should be up to citizens to define what science is, but at the end of the day, you can say this is science, this is not science, but every single person will still have their own emotions, values, what we were talking before, and still do their own choices, even if they know that something is science or not science. What we are talking about is engaging people in scientific processes, and there are lots of good examples of how this can be done.
Or create problems. And I think it's really, really important that we have solid evidence when we go out and give evidence. And that's, people don't always want to wait until the evidence is there for or against.
We need to underscore this conversation, and because our time is nearly up, and there's a beautiful National Museum for those who are going on the tour to explore above us. I think that this screen in particular, and where it scrolls down beyond this screen, could easily be the starting point for a week of discussions like these. There's so many fascinating ideas on there. We won't lose them. We will find some way to capture them, and all of you who've registered for this event, we will make sure that you know how to revisit this, should you wish to. Before handing over to our Finnish hosts for the final word, I just want to say on behalf of SAPEA, thank you very much indeed to our eminent speakers, especially those who've travelled long distances to come today, to our civil society auditors for observing our discussions and contributing in such a lively way to them throughout the day, and indeed to our Finnish hosts, especially the team at the Finnish Academy, Jaakko, Nana, Maria. It turns out the way to organise a successful event is just to have nice friends who do the work for you. So we're very grateful indeed for that. Thank you. Before we finish, I just want to remind you of one final thing. At this paperless conference, you were given a sheet of paper when you arrived. On the front was the programme. On the back is a little evaluation form. We would be over the moon if you took 30 seconds or a minute to fill in that evaluation form and drop it in one of the beautiful transparent plastic boxes by the registration desk on your way out. I would be delighted. There are pens there, should you not happen to have one on you. Thank you very much indeed. And for a few words finally, Risto.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we're coming to a close. I have to say, personally, I've really enjoyed the event. Thank you for SAPEA for coming to Finland and sharing all the great insight into various aspects of science advice. I want also to thank our co-organizers, our sister academies, and in particular, I want to thank all the participants and the audience, what in my opinion has been a surprisingly lively discussion and exchange of ideas. But before I finish, there's one person I would like to thank in particular, and that is Jaakko Kuosmanen, who has done tremendous work in putting this together for all of us. So I suggest that we give a big applause to Jaakko for putting it all together. So this is it. I hope we will come up with some useful advice, both to EU, both to Finnish government, and let's keep up the good work. Thank you.
And just to finish off with one more couple of words, and then we're off to wherever we came from. But I really do want to thank everyone for coming today, the auditors, the speakers, SAPEA. And I think that at the end of the discussions, we started to move towards questions about concepts and about how we define things. And I think that's one of the key takeaways that also for me, and it has been for personally for the spring that I've been working on this, that maybe we are living in this interregnum where we are using old concepts to try to figure out new things, and we're trying to dabble through, and we're not really kind of pinpointing, and these aren't very satisfactory, the concepts that we're actually using. And I've been trying to think what's the way around it, and the only things that I have thought of is that actually we just need to jump into new sorts of action and try to put things together, unobvious things, and see what happens, and then communicate and talk to each other about our experiences and see, what comes up, basically start to cook with new things, and then share what we've learned with each other and build networks. So I think that the key takeaway for me today has been the inception of new networks, also with our European and our Finnish friends, and we will definitely share all of our experiences on Sofi pilots with all of you in the future. So this is a start of a conversation, and we will see you all good people again. Thank you very much. Bye. Museum. So the museum, even if you haven't booked it, there are spaces and it's fully free. So Finnish or international, feel free to join. So it is at the main lobby at 4 p.m. So please do use the opportunity.